Welcome to On the Bench. I am your host for this episode, Brendan Sonnone. I'm joined by my partner in crime, Chris Nee. Apologies ahead of time if I don't sound very well. Still getting over some stuff. How do I look, Chris?
Better than you sounded a couple days ago.
Well, that's good. Moving in that direction. Let's get right into it, Chris. There's a ton going on in the world of FSU athletics, and FSU has found itself a pariah of sorts from some in ACC media, and yeah, it's kind of like FSU's the villain again. Feels like it's just the appropriate time for that to be the case as FSU gets into the swing of things at the start of a pretty important football season. FSU is full on knives out as it tries to pry itself from the ACC, kind of like that James Franco movie that I have no intent of ever seeing, where he's hiking and bad things happen. The idea of alarm sounding and dancing around this delicately, that's kind of out of the window now. Like FSU's Board of Trustees meeting yesterday made it very, very clear of what the intentions are. They're crystallizing at this point. Like FSU's decision makers do not want FSU to be in the ACC. That does, Chris, come with a caveat, right? Like of course, of not wanting to be in the ACC as it's currently comprised, like from a revenue distribution standpoint, but like the ACC hasn't made it the ground FSU wants, and as trustee Drew Weatherford, yes, that Drew Weatherford, we're old, said it doesn't seem like a matter of if you leave the ACC, it's a matter of when and how. So, Chris, let's dive into what was said, who said it, and what we think that means for FSU's future in the ACC.
Yeah, so Brendan's talking about the Board of Trustees meeting that happened yesterday with Florida State. It was virtually held with all the Board of Trustee members chiming in virtually. Myself, a handful of other media, a civilian, a cop as well, and then employees of the university were gathered together in a little room watching it on Zoom and keeping up with it. 4 agenda items, those were all known, and then at the end, President Richard McCullough spoke for a good bit, and that's where the fireworks really came from a sport perspective. President McCullough made a pretty lengthy statement. You can read the entire transcript. We put it up on the site yesterday. Brendan transcribed it for me. I appreciated that. And, he's pretty straightforward about the revenue gap. But let's not act like yesterday was some new development. FSU's been outwardly warning the ACC and anybody listening since at least February during another Board of Trustees meeting about the revenue gap that exists in the league, the meaning of FSU to the media deal that the ACC has, and the fact that FSU believes they are owed more money and they deserve more money for the revenue generation that they bring about for the Atlantic Coast Conference with their current deal with ESPN and other media partners. And they have done that again and again. May spring meetings, which Brendan attended, is another fine example. AD and Vice President Michael Alford went there and was very straightforward about the fact that he believed unequal revenue sharing was something that probably should exist for the league, and that schools like FSU and Clemson, who are the ones that bring about the money that the league so enjoys, deserve more because the landscape has changed. With the SEC and the Big Ten signing new media right deals, they're going to make a great deal of money, and there's going to be a large revenue gap for universities like Florida State and Clemson, who have full intentions of competing at the highest level. FSU has competed at the highest level numerous times in the last 3 decades, including 3 national titles in that time. Clemson's obviously had a phenomenal run here in the last decade where they've carried the league, while FSU did have down years. A lot of people really got out of their feelings, I guess, on Twitter yesterday, talking about FSU's recent downturn over the last
Twitter
5
versus
years.
FSU is back, baby. Let's go. It's been a minute.
They're welcome to point out those 5 down years, but the counter argument to that is look at the TV numbers. It still says FSU is box office boys and drawing them in. So, that's what this argument is about.
I point out, that's the name of the game is what does
eyeballs.
Your brand represent, or what can you make off of TV revenue?
It's all about eyeballs.
Texas hasn't been a national power in recent years. They got to the SEC. UCLA, USC haven't been super relevant other than USC in the last year or so. They are in the Big Ten. Rutgers 10 years ago was not winning any football games, and it's still not winning many football games. There's a reason why those schools are being coveted. It's because of what they bring from a certain dollars and cents perspective. I just want good faith arguments if this is going to be something that's debated about. Also, Clemson media, if you're thinking you're taking shots at FSU right now, don't think that your athletic director isn't sitting somewhere smiling, happy that FSU is taking the bullets for his school and probably is going to follow a similar path as FSU. What are we doing here? Sorry.
Yeah,
continue.
and I don't want to get in us versus them then, because I don't really care about this. This is about
do.
what Florida State intends to do and what they're being outward about. At this point, it's a healthy game of chicken, but it's a very public game of chicken. And this isn't something that you go as public as FSU has gone over now. What are we talking about? The last 6 to 7 months, basically. You just don't go that course of action if you don't have intentions of ultimately truly doing something, unless major changes are made by a conference that to this point in time has shown no intentions of making said major changes when it comes to how revenue is generated and distributed. So I'm not expecting the ACC to change course all of a sudden. So it's pretty clear that FSU has set a course. Now, what was the significance of yesterday beyond the statement by Richard McCullough? Well, his statement's very important because ultimately any decision that's made where a team is going to notify the conference it belongs to and the member institutions that it intends to leave, that while the AD can do a whole lot of legwork on that, ultimately that's up to a president or a chancellor as well as a board of trustees to make that ultimate decision. That's not a unilateral singularity decision. It's a group decision. I thought the most significant thing about yesterday was, one, you had the president outwardly saying it. Two, you had across the board support of it. Every BOT member agreed with it. We had multiple people speak out. Brendan already referenced Drew Weatherford, a member of the BOT. He is one of, I'd say, at least a half dozen members of the board who were very outspoken yesterday. Chairman Peter Collins obviously did an interview with War Chant here in recent days where he was not shy about many of these subjects when discussing it. And he has not been shy throughout this process as he's been the chairman of the board for Florida State with regards to this. And he's a man that understands private equity, things that it would take from a financial standpoint for FSU to venture into the wasteland of trying to depart a conference that has a grant of rights. Michael Alford obviously has been very, very vocal about it, especially from February to May. And I don't think he's been shy about exactly where FSU stands on this subject. So you put all of that together. And to me, yes, people can say, well, if you're going to do it. That's all well and good. And yes, we all love to fly off at the trigger and do things very quickly. When you're setting yourself up for potentially a major legal battle, which, let's be honest, if FSU does depart the ACC and has to fight a grant of rights, that's exactly what they're doing. You exhaust every possible angle of a subject to show you did your due work on it. And FSU is trying to do that. They have repeatedly gone to the conference and its member institutions and told them that they are here for more money and they believe they are owed it. And they have showed the reasons why they believe they are owed it. There are plenty of legal arguments that can come about for fighting grant of rights and anything else. And I'm not going to get into that because I'm not a lawyer. But we all know what some of them are. Basically, you signed a deal that's way too long, that the value of it has changed drastically within the own deal. And in comparison to other deals, media right deals for other leagues, they are not on par. It's not competitive. The monopoly, the market, however you want to frame that, there are legal arguments to be done. FSU has worked extremely hard on this. They were up front yesterday during that Board of Trustees meeting, unveiling the timeline of essentially this has been a year-long process. Carolyn Egan, who's lead counsel for FSU, along with plenty of other lawyers and other people that they've worked with, have looked into things thoroughly. They have vetted the numbers. They have presented the numbers. They have created a very thorough argument. They are not shy. And yes, at this point, because they have not actually done anything physically of saying departing the conference, it is a game of chicken. And they may not do it by the August 15th deadline, which for the record was referenced yesterday. But I think it was possibly BOT member Roth that said this. If it's not now, it's probably in the next year. And I think that's a realistic timeline to view this all through, because I don't believe the conference is going to change their standpoint on this. I believe FSU is going to do everything in their power to exhaust it all. Chairman Collins kept kind of teasing, well, we might be together a little bit before that September scheduled meeting that the Board of Trustees has surrounding the LSU game. And that's a reference to a potential basically executive meeting where they would discuss this subject and take actual action. We will see if that happens now in the next, 12 days is it that we're in the countdown for August 15th? But even if it doesn't mean this subject goes away. I don't think FSU is going to suddenly reverse course. I think they're too far down the road in their beliefs about where they stand financially and where it is for the next 13 years of this contract with the ACC, that they're not going to suddenly change course. And I thought yesterday the most important thing that came out of that, beyond the statements, was just that we showed that everybody is rowing the same direction within the FSU hierarchy. And that's very, very important. It's a university that's had dysfunction in the past with regards to how the hierarchy is organized and how it goes about doing its business. That is not the case, hasn't been the case here in a good while. Very refreshing. yesterday further reinforced that. You've got very smart people, very heavily invested in the idea of fixing this situation for FSU long term. And if people want to say it's a game of chicken, well, go ahead and play it, because I think FSU is willing to play it. I think FSU will take action. I think I've been abundantly clear about that over the last week or so, that it's changed. The narrative around FSU and what they intend to do with this, it's no longer we're looking into it. It's we're figuring out how to do this, and that's where FSU is now.
Yeah, plans of action. It's not progressing. Excuse me. So a few things. I think the counterpoint that people would have is like you could sit and wait and see if the ACC gets off its butt, but that doesn't seem like that's going to happen, right? Like I think at this point that's abundantly clear that's not what's going to happen.
Is the I don't know, take a random school, lower market school in the league. I'll throw Virginia Tech, I guess, out there. Is Virginia Tech suddenly going to walk in a meeting and be like, man, I don't want to lose FSU, but I'm willing to give up X amount of millions of dollars per year for that to go to FSU and potentially Clemson? If FSU and Clemson wants that chunk of the pie, is UNC or somebody like that, or Miami or Virginia, somebody that has some value potentially to jump to another conference where it's probably a better, sweeter pot than the current ACC, are they going to shy away from it? And suddenly, if 5 schools are splitting a little bit more money, are you getting enough money to make up that gap? I don't believe there's a realistic way for the ACC to make up the gap that's going to exist.
And if you're on the schools that you mentioned would all have, to some extent or another, some attraction to another conference, right?
Yeah, in the upper half of the ACC.
Right.
Yes.
Let's go to the bottom half. I won't even name a name. Like, like who's not attending games and who's not in the major media market. What's your, like, what if you're sitting their perspective? It's easy to understand why, like, there's some defensiveness. Like, what incentive would you have for FSU to give more money to FSU and Clemson right now?
Well, if this whole thing blows up, if the league blows up,
yeah.
And if you want an example, just look out west at Pac-12 and what's going on there currently. If this league blows up, there's probably 2 things that you potentially have at your disposal if you're a lower tier school in this league. You're going to have to drop down a conference and be in something far less than you wanted to be in the ACC, or you're going to form some kind of new conference similar to what the Big 12 has done, as they've reorganized and done a very effective job of doing so. But at this point, the Big 12's kind of taken away those that are worth something that aren't being invited to the big boy dance of the SEC and Big 10. And you're probably going to end up in some form or faction of former Pac-12 schools that still have remnants, ACC schools, and maybe a few others that you elevate. And wow, that's a coast-to-coast league. And all these leagues are going to obviously have a large footprint, but that's a truly coast-to-coast league. And I just don't know if that's appealing. Plus, let's be honest, we're seeing what's going on with the Pac-12 media deal right now. There's only so much money in the pot to go around. Like, you're making 30 in the ACC right now, or actually more than 30. I think it was 42 last year, roughly was the number. We're hearing numbers like 20 million basically for the new Pac-12 deal. Like, they're playing with fire with regards to that. So I don't know. It's a predicament for those schools, no doubt.
But like what? Okay, you mentioned if it blows up, like that is the worst case scenario for this bottom rung of ACC schools. That's what FSU I think is trying to accomplish, is to get this to blow up, so that way they grant of rights dissolves. Like that's the best case scenario for FSU, is you basically sound the alarms to the point where they're so vibrant and so deafening that where everyone's just jumping ship, like everyone's going right now, and you get enough teams to leave the conference to where it's more than half the league and the grant of rights dissolves. So you no longer have to worry about it. That would be the best case scenario, with you landing in the Big 10 or the SEC. Like that would be the pie in the sky for FSU. If you don't reach that threshold though, and the ACC is still around, just minus FSU, maybe a few other schools that would follow in the year or so after, or immediately, or whenever that timeline is, like then those schools that stayed back continue to have, as I would understand it, the same amount of money coming into the conference, just with fewer teams in there. And
yeah,
so I'm just saying that would be, if you're like a Wake Forest or someone, you're like, all right, go. If we still have 9 teams in this conference, and I'm making a few million more a year without FSU here, that doesn't seem so bad. So that and some of these programs in the ACC don't care about competing at at the highest level for football. Like just
That's where ESPN fits into this whole thing too. I mean, let's be honest, they play a role. They're the financial engine of a lot of this. They're a big part of media rights still for the ACC, and obviously they also have controlling power over some other leagues that are significant. So, they have to step to the table and make some decisions too, and they're obviously going to fight any departure from ACC of any school from the ACC. But
let's with that in mind, Chris,
they're also bleeding money currently.
That is why okay, let's get into this. So I wrote down a list of reasons what I think FSU, like what they were trying to. I've been watching a lot of Game of Thrones while sick and reading a lot of Game of Thrones while sick. So my mind's going to like all the like, what are you trying to say without saying it type of stuff. So let's go into it, and I want you to pick of like what you think FSU is trying to accomplish. It kind of explains some of the casting characters here. So one is that FSU could be trying to scare the ACC and ESPN to come to the table one last time and renegotiating or to rework the TV contract. Two is they could be trying to leverage the Big Ten for a substantive deal, right? And trying to put that out there a little bit. They could be trying to shake free the SEC one last time. That seems unlikely to me, and that goes back to ESPN and ESPN not having a ton of money. And that complicates things. That ACC is connected to ESPN, and so is the SEC. Like I think that's a pretty big deal in all this. They could be trying to scare the ACC's like B teams to jump ship for a shot at dissolving the grant of rights. Although like those schools like probably have to already have known like FSU was trending this direction. It hasn't really been a secret. It's just more public than it's ever been. Or they could be trying to create like a paper trail for legal case to support a reason for leaving, and leaving is more or less imminent at this point. So those are the reasonings that I have.
So my favorite answer on test was always all of the above. And yeah, I think pretty much all those factors are in there. So I view it kind of like history always tells us a story. The Pac-12 is just ahead of schedule of where the ACC currently is. Pac-12 got into a situation where their media deal wasn't very good and schools were unhappy about it. They lost their two leading properties, USC and UCLA. They come back to the table for a new media rights deal because theirs was eclipsing. It was ending, not like the ACC's where it's, never ending 2036. And the new deal is not very good. And we're probably going to see that league largely potentially dissolve here in the next, week or so. A lot of talk of Arizona potentially leaving. Arizona State's at the table too because Arizona's there. Talk of Utah. We've heard plenty of whispers about Washington and Oregon. So that's a healthy amount of teams from that league that are considering something right now. And it's a really uncomfortable place to be if you're an Oregon State or a Washington State because you probably don't have options really in front of you. The ACC, the difference for them is that the media rights that they currently have is through 2036. But if the value of that deal goes bottom up, I don't know that deal sustains, basically. If you lose FSU and Clemson, I don't know how there's not this doesn't work for us. We're not going to continue to do this and some kind of legal fight because this is all going to be contractual legal fights eventually. And that's another point you made. It's legal fights. But I think FSU, part of the reason they haven't been in a rush to end the game of chicken and actually move on to action is you have to exhaust everything to show you actually made an effort to exhaust everything. And FSU has. FSU has been outward with this repeatedly, including in direct conference meetings with media present outside those meetings where it was discussed, for example, in May. Obviously, the BOT in February, which got plenty of focus upon it yesterday. You are constantly going about doing your due diligence and doing everything humanly possible to show that we're not just jumping to jump, potentially. We would like to stay, per the words of President Richard McCullough yesterday, but the current situation is not sustainable. And that's where FSU is. They've been very upfront about it. And I get that it's ruffled feathers, turned them into the villain, but FSU's looking out for FSU. And in the current climate of college football and media rights deal, you have to. Because if you don't, you're going to get left out in the cold or be scrambling. And we're seeing that out west right now. Is that really far off from happening over here in the East with the ACC? I don't think so, outside of the TV deal being through 2036. But, those things can change if the circumstances change.
You mentioned the Pac-12, Pac-9 now, Pac however many in the next days and weeks we will see. Like that is all escalating quickly. You mentioned that a few times, Chris. that does feel like a domino, like for Florida State. Like if that thing falls quickly, like in the next like before August 15th, I think that makes FSU's course of action pretty. I don't want to say clear, but
I think back in May or June, I definitely said it a few times. I probably even mentioned it on a pod when we talked about the subject a little bit in the past. I always thought the Pac-12 and things falling apart, and specifically their new media deal, was a huge domino in all of this, because it kind of is an indication of, if you're not in the SEC or the Big, where do you stand long term moving forward as a college football conference? And I think it shows that if you're not in one of those big two as they work towards super conferences at whatever timeline they're going to have, that it's a very uncomfortable place to be. I mean, the ACC deal right now is viewed as the third best. Big 12 will eventually eclipse it. But, like, you know, it doesn't have sustainability. For the deal to be signed through 2036 with no renegotiation window expected, it isn't sustainable if you want to be a top 15 program competing at the highest level, and that you have an athletic program that you want to keep healthy and fertile, top to bottom, which FSU does. You can't do it. It's just not sustainable. It doesn't work. It's I forget which chairman said it yesterday, and I apologize. It's a math problem. He's right.
And that's what leads me to believe, like, that I think a lot of this is you're creating a paper trail for when this inevitably does go to court. Like, I think you were basically putting this all out there to have, say, you mentioned due diligence many times, Chris. Like, that is what you're going to have to show, is like the FSU is not only saying that it's afraid, and like some of the things that were mentioned yesterday, like they mentioned being fearful for what's going to happen to their football program because of what programs all around you are going to be getting from an annual standpoint, and that gap. But then they talk about how that's going to impact their Title IX programs, so the non-revenue sports.
Yeah, it's a waterfall trickle down effect.
That was not an unintentional thing to mention, what it will do to the rest of the athletic department. And then you can start planting the seeds of, well, if our athletic department starts becoming less profitable in general to all sports, men and women, then what will that do to our university?
So,
right? And then if you get to the point where it happens to your university, starts bleeding money from the athletic department standpoint and isn't as profitable, what does that do to the city? And so, like, that's kind of stuff I think that you're setting up for, is like, we were put in an untenable situation. We had to act for the livelihood of this entire entity that really supports a region in this state. So sorry, Chris.
We all know that the SEC and the Big is going to make big money, but like UCF's come up in this conversation because they're joining the Big 12, and obviously that is expected to eclipse the ACC at some point during their upcoming media rights deal. And FSU is like that. Basically, that's crazy to think, and that's not a slight towards UCF. It's just one program has won 3 national titles, and the other one just claims one. You know,
one.
Yeah, I had to do that to you, buddy. But that's true. Like, that's the point that they keep making. And I think the counterpoint to this, beyond what FSU is saying, is more so what the ACC isn't saying. The ACC is not trying it in public because I think they understand where this will eventually probably lead, which is more than likely some form of a legal battle, or at least a healthy round of negotiation regarding a potential buyout, payout, exit fee, combined financials.
I am, and I got one last point on this, or one last question for you, but I am remiss if I don't give a shout out, long overdue. Chattanooga Whiskey, the sponsor of our podcast. I've not been able to partake in a Chattanooga Whiskey. Last time I did was last Friday, was the last time I was feeling well, to watch the Charles Lister commitment ceremony. It was a celebratory drink of Chattanooga Whiskey, but it would have been great no matter what the outcome was, because I did have my CW next to me. Chattanooga Whiskey is killing it in the craft distillery game. One of the best craft distilleries out there, certainly the best regionally. They do an amazing job with bourbon, cast strength bourbon, awesome. The 111 full proof for what you're paying for it is phenomenal. Their rye is great. Their experimental stuff is amazing as well. So a proud sponsor for us. Love their product. They do a great job. And then also the Turner Group. If you're looking to maybe leave your home, Florida State, reach out to the Turner Group, and Colin and Amy Turner can help you find a dream home. They can help you sell your current home for maximum profit, or even if you're looking to rent in Tallahassee, they can maybe help you find a better avenue that you could actually profit from down the road. If you're sending some of your Rugrats to Florida State coming up this semester and haven't found a place yet. Got to act quickly. Reach out to Colin Turner of the Turner Group. Just Google the Turner Group and all the information will pop up right there. All right, last point, Chris, and we're getting this question a lot on the message boards, and I don't think it's a thing that we can give a definitive answer to because we don't know. But like, what happens next? Like, what do the next few weeks look like? What do we expect to happen? Just even your gut. Like, this isn't a projection from Chris. This isn't him reporting on something. This is just like what he thinks, how he's anticipating the next few weeks going from a workflow standpoint.
I am not positive that they have an executive meeting or another meeting of any sort between now and August 15th and act before that date. Plain simple, be straightforward on that. I think the possibility wholeheartedly exists. I kind of agree with the member to BOT yesterday who said if it's not by then, it's probably in the next 12 months. I agree with that timeline. I'm not convinced that they rush into it simply from a legal standpoint. The only difference that really makes is you're essentially stuck in the league for one additional year as you're trying to sort this out. But I think from an FSU perspective, you're trying to do everything humanly possible to put yourself in the best position for if you do go forward with this, to do it in the most efficient financial manner humanly possible. But you also got to show that you have made every effort, exhausted every effort to not take the action that you take.
Okay, let's transition now. I think that was constructive 20 minutes or so on what happened yesterday, and it was certainly an entertaining afternoon to what was a busy day for Chris and Brett as they were covering FSU's like preseason luncheon with the coaches. So we had all the interviews with the head coach, the assistant coaches across the board over on Noles 24/7. And that's kind of what's funny was like what happened yesterday. It kind of like undercut. They're like, oh, hey, fall camp begins today, Chris. As we're recording this on Thursday morning, it starts this afternoon. FSU also got a couple of commitments. It's decision week for a 5-star prospect. It almost feels like it's an afterthought based on what's happening, but we do have to get to the other things that are happening in the world of FSU football because that is the bread and butter of this podcast. So let's talk about those other things. Before we do, I want to give a round of applause and a legitimate thank you to everyone who signed up for our promo that we did in the back half of July. It was a really busy month of July for us, productive in a lot of fronts. And I'm really proud of the work that we've done and did collectively as a website. And it legitimately gives me like happiness, pleasure that like you guys noticed it. And we had more than 500 people sign up for like annual memberships, which is crazy. We really do appreciate the amount of support and for people giving us a try, and even like long-term subscribers who gave a vote of confidence to us and told their friends, like, thank you for that. So we do appreciate it. And let's hit the football season coming up here. We'll hit the ground running, except for me, as I probably missed the first practice or two because I'm still quarantining. Chris, let's start off by talking about some commitments from this past week. Last Friday, FSU got the verbal from Charles Lester. We had talked about it beforehand that was kind of the expectation. Colorado was lurking in the shadows with that visit, and like just we've learned, history has taught us, right? You don't discount.
I appreciated Lester shooting straight that he committed on his official visit. And I mean, he came out of the building and told a collection of media members, including myself, that he had committed, and basically said, can you please keep it quiet till I have my ceremony at the end of July, which he then went about setting up. But there was always that concern in the 6-week window, basically between then and when he actually announced that things go sideways and such. And that's just the pessimism that exists from doing this long enough where you've seen it happen before. Yeah, but he lived up to what he had said and done. And truthfully, I think he may have even committed, and not in the same manner he did in June, but I think his mind was pretty well made up when he made that legacy weekend visit.
I think he'd committed multiple times or insinuated he'd committed multiple times before he actually committed. So anyways, that's a 5-star cornerback that you add to your class. That's a premium player at a premium position. We talked about it at length. I know not on the podcast stream, but we did do it on the OTB Noles 24/7 YouTube feed. We did a live commitment watch with Coach AB, Kevin, myself. Excuse me. So yeah, that was a huge commitment. We've covered that extensively at Noles 24/7. A big domino to fall for someone else who we'll talk about in a minute here. Let's talk about the other commitments, Chris. Linebacker Tamir Hickman Collins from northern South Carolina, almost up by North Carolina way, almost up to Charlotte. He has an 86th grade per 24/7 Sports, 82nd at his position. So he's firmly 3-star status as a linebacker. Listen, he came to camp. He basically got the green light to commit after the camp. Please let us know how that recruitment went down, and we'll talk about his game real quick.
FSU had been on him a while. They got him in for a visit during the spring, had built a good relationship with him. Randy Shannon and him had gotten to know one another very well. As he mentioned, he comes to Seminole Showcase. He works out, gets the green light after that. He told Zach actually that evening that he had committed, went public with it. I forget if it was the next day or the following day.
We were all eating cheeseburgers together, and Jack and I shared a milkshake, and he still doesn't have COVID. And I don't understand how that didn't happen.
Yeah, and THC, Tamir Hickman Collins, is a kid that they like, and it's just funny. Linebacker recruiting is sort of its own little beast in the animal, and everybody's got an opinion and a hot take to share on it, but it's clear as day that Randy Shannon has a type, and THC fits into that. I watched him work a good bit at the camp. I watched him do one-on-ones, and the tight end big man talent that he was going against was good, but not like set your world on fire great. He was decent. Like I didn't love him. I didn't hate him. I just very much fell in the middle. And I thought the foot speed was okay, which on film, I honestly am a little like, he's not slow, but he runs kind of, I guess, clunky is the best way I can describe it. He's definitely a kid that I think from an athleticism standpoint, and playing the position specifically, some things can be cleaned up. And I'm interested how he handles that and does that. I don't think he's all world. I don't think he's a guy that will never play down. He'll have some kind of value on your roster. At the end of the day, I think FSU's collecting linebackers of a similar type and hoping a few of them pan out. I still think they probably ultimately end up looking in the portal for a high-end experienced college linebacker because obviously you're losing two very good ones after this coming season.
Who was the linebacker? And I'm not trying to be snarky, but like I just want to go over like how I felt about something at the time. Who was the linebacker they got from Texas, ended up transferring to UNLV? Like
Eubanks, Jordan Eubanks.
And I remember watching
this, if I recall, that was either COVID take or it happened right before COVID, and they never.
It was that 2021 cycle where you couldn't eval in person. And I remember watching the film and being like, I just like maybe like you'd kind of see the path, but you really had to like.
I always felt like Eubanks was a big safety that you're trying to transition to linebacker, but he wasn't really capable of still being a safety at the next level.
Yeah, it was too much tweener stuff, and like I don't feel quite like that. Hickman Collins doesn't give me the same level of like I just don't see it. I do think there's a pretty clear cap on his game. Like he's not going to be a high round prospect based on his movement skills. I do think those are somewhat limiting, but there's also a lot of fun stuff on film with him in between the tackles and him being instinctive and quick trigger, and like that is the stuff that Randy Shannon seems to really value is can you read? Can you be in the right place? Can you stop the ball from moving forward when you hit the hole? And like that, those are the basics of linebacker. I know that's not sexy. I know that's limiting from if you want to talk about this defense played up to a championship level, like, yeah, it's not going to look like the Georgia linebackers. Like that's reasonable. But that does not mean that the player doesn't have a level of value. To me, like there's a cap to it, and that's fine. That's my opinion on it. Like that, I'm saying like I do see a level of value there. I'm interested to see what he becomes.
I like Jaden Parrish more, but you've got Jaden Parrish, you've got THC, you got Dylan Brown Turner, you've got DeMarco Ward. I feel like out of that group, your hope is you're hitting at 50%. You got two guys who are serviceable help. You got worse, maybe like a DJ Lundy type of guy.
Cryer as well. Don't forget. I don't think he's been added.
Justin Cryer. Thank you. Thank you for mentioning him. Let me check that. You feel good about Blake Nicholson. Obviously, he's got athletic traits that are different than any of those guys we just mentioned. Omar Graham's a guy who, and we'll get into this with preseason camp talk, but he's a guy that they invested a lot in last year, and they feel pretty good about. So, like your next group up to Lundy and Omar Graham, would hope that Blake Nicholson kind of takes that Omar step in his next level next year. I still think you got to go portal just from an experience type. I think you also got to add a guy who's a higher ceiling, not necessarily higher ceiling, but like closer to a ceiling and above what that room is in general. I don't lose sleep over the linebacker room. I understand people's frustration with the recruiting of it. I think they like recruiting guys who they view as good football players, and that's sort of it. And I get it; they're allowed to recruit better. Like I'm not here for the argument. I'm tired of the argument, but at the same time, I get the argument.
Zach's screaming somewhere in South Florida right now. uh, Also named at linebacker, Ashlyn Barker, who's a safety currently, but like we've seen him in person. I'm very curious to see him now with pads on. Like that might be a dude who one they like already.
Mike Norvell goes out of his way to mention him quite often.
Him. Yeah. And we had a review like subscribed to us earlier in July, like the teas that we were dropping that week, like had him mentioned, like they did like him. And when he was a take here, like it's as a safety, but like he's in year 2 of college football. Like if he becomes someone who grows an extra 10 pounds and the frame gets a little bit bigger, like he might be
he definitely can help you in the box. Yeah, I mean, right now he can help you in the box.
Does he check the boxes?
New me, new year.
Is he a corner or a safety? Okay,
He's definitely a safety.
Let's move on to the other commitment. This one felt like a long time coming, but the offer had to come first. But this is something that FSU was chipping away at and kept getting him on campus, and that is offensive lineman Jaden Todd. He has an 85 grade per 24/7 Sports up in Dublin, Georgia. Let's talk about it, Chris. I know someone that you're a big fan of, and it doesn't have the highest offer pool or the highest grade. There's reasons why for it, and I will I will defer to you because I know that you're a big fan.
You remember how I liked Chris Otto last year? Well, this is this year's version of that. He's a very big, very large human, 6'3" and a quarter, and he is very wide, very tough to get around. FSU had him for a workout in early June at the elite camp. They had him back for showcase and got to put him through it a little bit more. They like him a ton. He almost got offered in June. They were extremely close to pulling the trigger in June on him. They got the other workout. They went ahead and did it. I think they view him as a kid who, 1, he's very intelligent. 2, he's got a good work ethic. 3, he's got a very high ceiling. 4, he's just tough to get around. Like that's always been the description of him in workouts is like the foot movement is good. The hand placement is good. Technique and fundamentals for where he's at and having only played 1 year of high school football are good enough. And we expect him to get better. But plain and simple, the ability to get around the guy as a blocker is extremely difficult. Jaden wanted it. I mean, he came here in mid-May and visited, and that began the relationship. Chris Thompson had kind of done the work before that because that's his recruiting area. And he's a kid that they got in front of Atkins and Gabe Fertitta and Cooper Williams, who do the offensive line room as a group. And they liked him a great deal. And I think it was a matter of just kind of figuring out, do we want to take another high school offensive lineman this year? And is there value in taking a kid like that? And there is. He's got a tackle-sized body, but he can probably play anywhere along the line. And they like him. He's probably a stowaway kid. He's probably not a kid that does a whole lot for you in year 1 or 2. But if he figures it out, he's got a real shot. And he's got a lot of traits they love, which is strong, smart, good enough feet, willing learner, kid who likes to work. There's just a lot about him they really like. And you can read the interview and tell that the kid, he stuck it out. I mean, he had VTech. He had a bunch of Ivy League offers. But VTech probably would have been the winner in this thing if he did not wait out FSU. But he decided to do it, and he earned it. And I think there's a degree of that earns the respect of the people in the room at FSU with the young man, and that's why they went ahead and took him.
You know, you mentioned that, Chris, that he stuck it out and he earned it. And I thought this on Saturday during the Seminoles showcase. All these programs around the country have their final barbecue, swim party, whatever it may be. You have your thing that's your brand, and to kind of be the last hurrah of summer. You get to see who's interested in you, and it's valuable. Mike Norvell uses it as a chance to do a little bit more competition, to have an abbreviated camp, to kind of get some more data and information on guys. And I just think that speaks to I know I can sometimes be guilty of taking something little and making it a big point, but like I just like Jaden Todd is a perfect example. Him and Hickman Collins are really good examples of like this staff appreciates guys who are willing to work. And that is something that is in Mike Norvell's like fabric of his like DNA. Like that's what he is as a coach. That's what he is as a person. He lives that life, to steal Chris Neeism. Like he lives that life consistently. And so like the guys who come on that last weekend of the summer, when they're about to start their own preseason camps at they're going into their senior years, you come and you work and you bust your butt for an hour. Like, yeah, like that is something that's going to point to a cultural fit long term. And so like I don't dismiss any like those guys who are there working hard and absorbing and learning and willing to do extra testing outside of what we can see. Like, yeah, like that all matters. And that's stuff that is not going to show up in the rankings at 24/7 Sports or other networks. It may not be this thing that you can like necessarily quantify, but it does matter. And
Yeah.
And yeah, I think Jaden Todd he doesn't get that. He's not committed to Florida State if he doesn't come in camp.
Right. Yeah. And there's a degree of like Elijah Moore came in camp. He's already kid committed, but he came and put in a workout and he was excellent.
Really
and
good.
I thought he was the best guy in the gym on the day when I was watching. I didn't watch the big man. I just watched skill, but I thought he was the best guy. I thought there were a few quarterbacks that really threw it real well on the day and such. You watch more of the big men going and stuff. But like the thing with Jaden Todd, with Tamir Hickman Collins, with guys like that, if you're in front of the coaching staff and you show one, a desire to be there, two, a willingness to work, three, you're receptive to coaching, and four, you just display qualities that are similar to what they're looking for in players, the fabric of the culture of the program, the DNA of the program, there's a value to those guys. And like, I understand we all just want to collect the best possible players. And FSU is trying to do that. Don't know if you've noticed, but they have a pretty damn good recruiting class this cycle going on. They're going to do that. They're going to get to Charles Lester's world. They're going to pursue a guy like KJ Bolden, so on and so forth. But they're also going to take a few guys that are just sort of the DNA, like wholeheartedly. And they also believe in their evaluations. They think Tamir Hickman Collins is a much better player than Chris Need thinks he is. Plain and simple. And I'm cool with that. Like, they're welcome to. They get paid a lot of money and they, keep their jobs or lose their jobs with how those things turn out. So I understand why they're doing it. I'm a believer in Jaden Todd. I think he's very good. I think his ceiling is very high. I think he's a kid who's well worth the gamble of taking.
One last note on Jaden Todd is I think his like watching his film and just seeing him move in person and just asking around about him, like his power, his raw strength. He's just kind of like just figuring that all out. Like once he puts it together, that upside of what he can be as a people mover or someone who just can't be moved, like in pass pro, it may end up being special. Like that, there is the chance that you're gambling on this one, but it is a gamble of like you see what the upside is, and I'm totally cool with that. Like I think that makes sense. I'd be remiss if I didn't mention that they also had a commitment on that Saturday as well, and I almost forgot about that one. And that was from a 4-star offensive tackle, Manasse Atete, from Northern California, Modesto, California. But he's initially from, where is he, Chris?
Democratic Republic of Congo.
Okay. And so he has a 92, overall. Oh my God. Struggle bus here. 92 overall grade per 24/7 Sports, 142nd nationally by us. I think we're a little bit higher on him than the industry, but still 4-star composite ranking for him. Some of the FSU, basically, we don't get to say they flipped him from USC because he committed from USC the day before, but I'm going to count it as a flip in my own personal record book, Chris.
Yeah, and we covered him thoroughly. He's a kid that from his spring visit till that June visit to USC, FSU led. And the USC visit, he's a highly impressionable kid. We called him that when he committed to USC. We're still going to call him that now. He's a kid that went to USC, loved it, and committed there. But FSU kind of stayed with it. And I think the long-term relationship and the fact that he had been so high on FSU mattered. Alex Atkins did a good job. Derek Ray, who's got ties to the area where Manasse is at, played a big role in it. And FSU did a good job. He's a high-ceiling offensive lineman, tackle-type body. He's going to have to figure it out a bit. I think he's only played 14 high school games, if I recall correctly, what Brandon Huffman told me, our West Coast analyst. So he's a kid that's going to be raw in the American game, but he's, again, a high upside kid. It's not a great high school offensive line year, but I think FSU's done a good job of taking some good-sized bodies with good athletic traits. And, again, you kind of throw numbers at it. You hope a few of them pan out. That's what your future is at those spots.
And you're probably going to have a lot of guys leave after this season, too. Like, you have a lot of veterans currently on the roster. And
they like carrying ballpark of at least about 18 O-line. So they're not shy of being a little heavy in that position. I think they'll still pursue Jason Zandamela, another USC commitment, Clearwater Academy kid, originally from Mozambique. He's a kid that they love. He's probably an interior. Well, he is an interior lineman. He's probably a kid that can be a dominant center. He'll be a little bit more of a difficult pull. He really, really likes USC, likes a lot of what they have to offer from an academic and an athletic standpoint. So I don't think he's one who's going to be easily swayed back. But I don't think FSU is going to give up the chase there. They have a good relationship with staff at that school. Lucas Simmons, who's currently on the roster, and Jason Zandamiller are good friends. There are ties there. We'll see how that progresses. There's nothing that I expect imminently with regards to Jason Zandamiller, but we'll see, like Miami weekend. He's one of those guys that I'm very interested. Does he show up for Miami weekend?
So FSU, with all the aforementioned additions, currently sits, easy for me to say. I'm starting to fade here. Sits at 6th nationally.
Take a swig of Chattanooga whiskey. Who cares that it's 9 a.m.?
That might actually help. We'll see. Gargle it. FSU sits 6th nationally in the class rankings, which is pretty cool, Chris. This was a team that was ranked 26th before the start of July. There are a lot of people freaking out on the message board. There are a lot of people telling them not to freak out. And here we are, early August. FSU sits 6th nationally. And that will transition us into what could become, what may not become, but something that we're going to keep a really close eye on these next few days, the commitment ceremony of KJ Bolden. That'll be on Saturday, August 5th, sometime in the evening, I think like 7 to 8-ish range, sometime in the evening. It'll be up in Buford.
Would you say that's a pivotal moment, Brendan?
Yeah, that would be it. That would be big.
All right, so I'll host here for a second.
Okay, I'm going to go get some water real quick.
All right, so hustle, my friend, but we'll be upfront about this. Brendan's carried the load when it's come to covering KJ Bolden's recruitment. He's done a ton of work here. He's got good sources on. He's worked very, very hard. We've all, myself, Zach, and him, have all dealt with KJ Bolden, and Dane have all dealt with KJ Bolden during this recruitment. KJ visited FSU for a multi-day unofficial in June. We believe that was an extremely important visit and putting FSU truly in striking distance of this recruitment. Early throughout the distance of this recruitment, most people have expected to be Georgia. Ohio State was long thought to be number 2 school there by most. We, as Noles 24/7 folk, over the last month, wholeheartedly believe FSU's thoroughly been in that top 2 with Georgia. Auburn's made this kind of interesting. They got them on campus for a visit at the end of July for Big Cat Weekend. Did a lot of work. They had a huge weekend, flipped a couple 5-star type of kids and whatnot. And, let's not discredit what Auburn's willing to do recruiting-wise, what Hugh Freeze is as a recruiter. So they're going to put themselves in that mix. And there's been plenty of chatter with that in recent days since that visit. So, Brendan, here, Thursday, August 3rd, 9 a.m., where do you stand on KJ Bolden?
I think in a similar spot as I stood in mid-July, early July, when we reported that FSU was very much so in contention for him. And I felt at that point, at that time, that FSU, if I had to pick that day, that I would pick FSU. And if I had to pick here today at August 3rd, 9:03 a.m., I would still pick FSU. And that doesn't mean that it's going to happen. That doesn't mean that things can't change. That just means that my sourcing, which normally, someone asked on the board, Chris, how many times, how many people do you need to hear from usually to feel good out a guy's going to commit? 1 or 2 normally. If the person's someone that you trust and you hear from enough, we will usually at least start formulating our idea that's going to happen with 1 or 2, right?
Yeah, and it is fair to say, and I think you'd probably agree with me on this, KJ Bolden's done a phenomenal job of handling this recruitment in the sense of kind of keeping people guessing. And, despite the fact that Georgia was long thought to be the leader and the favorite, he's never been outward with that here in recent months. He's kept parties alive in this, whether it's Ohio State, Florida State, recently Auburn, Georgia throughout. That's a fair statement to say. KJ has done a good job playing the game.
And so with that in mind, trying to think of what I can and can't say. I've heard from enough more than what we would normally hear from in any recruitment to say that you feel good about it, a lot more than normal. And then when we start checking in with people familiar with Buford sources, because I'm not reaching out to people in Buford every day. You're not, Chris. That's not our area. But from the people in Buford that we do talk to, no one's told us like, yeah, you're crazy for saying that you think it's going to be Florida State. Like, so that's the little variable, the little piece of that pie that like, or piece of that puzzle, excuse me, that makes me feel like, okay, what we're hearing from like with FSU being relatively optimistic, and every coaching staff is optimistic to your point, right? Like that is what you mentioned with KJ Bolden. That's
you don't work as hard as you do in a recruitment like this, not to have some form of optimism at the end of it.
Right. And so, yeah, like I know what's out there. I know what other, like I get it, the screenshots sent to me constantly throughout the day. Like I know what other people are saying. I hear it. I know what you guys are reading and seeing. I know what's being put on our board. I know what's out there. And I still feel the way I feel. And like that, again, I'm not saying it's 100% going to happen. I think it's more likely to happen in FSU to get a commitment from him than not. And I could be wrong on that. And it will be a fun story to tell and to break down what happened if FSU does not get him, based on all the information we have. So
if it's not FSU, who do you think it is?
A few days ago, I thought it would be Auburn. I think some of that's died down a little bit. Georgia still being optimistic does baffle me based on a few things that I've heard. Because I thought Georgia, I can't go any further on it. I
have, as I said, Brendan and Zach have done much more heavy lifting with this one than I have. I've always maintained some belief that I'll believe it when I see it, not being Georgia.
You know, that just from a gut perspective, Chris, I would agree with you there. Like based on what I could hear things and that's fine. And I also have, I guess sometimes when you report, you also have to like go with the gut and like, does that make sense? And like, yeah, if I were to be going to the ceremony on Saturday, if that were something I were to do, if I were to ever get out of quarantine, I would be driving up with a lot of anxiety that I'm driving up to cover a Georgia commitment.
How is that different than any other Saturday for you?
It's usually not a Georgia commitment. It's just a lot of anxiety while driving.
Couple reasons why FSU's thoroughly in this. One, they were first offered. Two, KJ's maintained that FSU is a childhood favorite type of school. Three, the relationship he's built with Pat since his hire at FSU. Four, the effort of Mike Norvell. We regularly hear about how Mike Norvell recruits players. KJ Bolden's one of those dudes that he's certainly earmarked, has built a relationship, has worked very hard with. Five, that multi-day unofficial in June was vitally important. FSU did a really, really good job there. He spent a great deal of time with position coaches figuring things out. FSU has a clear and distinct plan for him as a defensive back, not specifically as a safety. I think that's appealing to him and something that he likes. Six, they've done a really good job of recruiting some people around him that they also like, that he's very close with. So there's relationships there that go beyond just KJ. Charles Lester is one of those. Charles Lester's commitment to FSU was very important in the potential of FSU getting KJ Bolden. Yeah. If FSU doesn't get Lester, I think Bolden is done. Like I don't think it happens. And that's personal opinion based on some stuff I know about this recruitment. So those are some of the reasons why optimism does exist. We will see how it plays out.
We will see. Are you? I mean, Chris, you've kind of taken "I'll believe it when I see it" approach. So I'm not trying to chip away at you here, but like, do you feel differently than you did a month ago? Like how are you?
Yeah, I thoroughly believe FSU has a legitimate shot of landing. Yes, okay. And I was not there a month ago, despite good intel and people showing confidence and whatnot. I just thought it was sort of coming off of June. You felt like you did a good job, but that's going to wear off. No, I think there's been lasting power with that. I think FSU. I understand why FSU has optimism, and I am still paying attention to Saturday. But I am not dismissive of Georgia. Kirby Smart has done a phenomenal job of getting who he wants into Athens when he wants them, beating out the juggernauts, and FSU is now competing with said juggernauts. And it's tough, but yeah, I'm a pessimist by reality. I've just done this too long not to be. But FSU's done a really, really good job recruiting, and I'll be honest, when they shoot very straight when they tell us things, and they're comfortable with things. I think they feel good about what they've done in this recruitment throughout.
It's just other people feel good, and like that's
KJ playing a good game though.
When was the last time you've covered or been part of seen FSU part of a recruitment like this, where like legitimately like no one knows, everyone knows, like this is recruiting chef's kiss. Like if you're into the entertainment perspective of recruiting, like this is as fun as it gets. If you're anxious like me, it's probably not as much fun.
I'm probably misremembering it to some degree, but I feel like Kayvon Thibodeau's recruitment had a portion where it was like this, maybe not at the end of it, but during
Yeah.
it. And he was obviously a very significant individual who's now gone on to be a pretty good NFL player. There's been others. I mean, Dalvin Cook had twists and turns in his, certainly, including multiple commitments before ending up at FSU. Those are some of the ones that come to mind, but he's a player of those magnitudes where he's a difference maker. He's arguably the best safety in the country from a ranking standpoint, and he is a dude who's going to be an early high-level college football player.
Marvin Wilson, maybe in that same class. Oh, no, he was in the makers class.
Marv was a guy that there was a lot of work, and the fact that he was out of state in Houston, you had to go beyond LSU and such. And I think, if I recall correctly, LSU was a big contender there at the end that caused the most concern.
Yeah, that was like into the bitter end. You were having to scrape and fight. So we will see. It'll be fun. It'll be a fun Saturday because I don't think that we'll feel great with anything with that information that we have until we see what happens on that Saturday afternoon. All right, last thing, and we'll get out of here. Preseason camp begins. Football season is here. And look how long it took us an hour to get to it because there's so much other stuff going on. But preseason camp is here. We are going to turn a lot of our focus in the next week or so, onto football from a podcasting perspective. All that coverage has been football oriented at Noles247.com. And it will continue to be. Unfortunately, I will not be able to be out there for the first practice. We will see what the rest of the week looks like. But Chris and Brett will be out there holding the fort down, doing the best they can. I'll be helping out remotely the best I can. So we will be out there. This is going to be a fun season for Florida State, one with a lot of high expectations. We'll be talking about all that stuff. And you guys are already pretty informed on the team based on what we talk about with them throughout the offseason. But real quick, Chris, as we get into fall camp here, I just want to go position by position, not a preview type of thing, anything like that.
I love going position by position.
I know you do, and we will do more takeaways and stuff like that in the coming days or week or so, position. But I want to set a bar here. I want to give us kind of a starting place as we start to take in analysis and take in information. I want to go with our confidence ratings by position, okay? Now I've done that for the season preview, the position previews for the season at Noles247.com, right? So I will go ahead and do the breakdown of what I think the depth chart's going to look like, key players returning, storylines, stuff like that. At the end, do a confidence rating. Been doing that since, I think, 2016, since I first came here to Noles247. And the confidence rating basically is my idea of where I think Florida State's position group would be compared to other position groups in the Power 5. And I use it as a percentile. So if it's a 10, that means you're in the 100th percentile. If it's an 8 out of 10, that means you're in the 80th percentile compared to other position groups at the same level of you as you nationally. All right. So I'm going to go ahead position by position, Chris, tell you what I've put down. Or how about this? We'll go position by position. You tell me what you think you would have, and then I'll tell you what I've put down already. And then we'll reevaluate this at the end of camp. Okay. That all makes sense?
Yeah, we're good.
Okay. All right. I'm going delirious. Quarterback.
I'd go 10 or 9 at the worst. I think Jordan Travis is one of the best in the country. I think Jordan Travis has got a masterful handle of the Florida State offense, what's expected of him. And the chatter from within the building is that Jordan Travis is determined to be an even better version of Jordan Travis. And I ain't one to doubt Jordan Travis. He's taught me those lessons one too many times. And the other reason I feel good about it is nobody wants to see their second quarterback necessarily, or some people really do. Some people really love their backup quarterbacks. But I feel comfortable that if FSU got into a pinch and had to play Tate or somebody else, that room has enough talent that with the talent surrounding them on the offense, that FSU would still be a highly successful football team.
I'm with you out of 10, Chris. I think you feel as good as anyone does nationally, maybe other than USC, about your quarterback, your starting quarterback. And I feel like you probably feel as confident with your number 2 quarterback entering the year as most teams nationally, because you've seen him do it at this point. And there's some value to that. So I'm at a 10 as well. I think it is elite. It is one of the top 2 or 3 best position group quarterback rooms in the country. And also I like Brock Glenn. Running back. Let's see. What do you have there for running back?
I'd probably go about 9, 8's in consideration, but I think I settle on at 9. I think Trey Benson's a guy who can go for 1,000. I think Rodney Hill's a guy that's going to step up and have a big impact. I'm not going to discount Keziah Holmes doing a little bit for them. I think they find some spot duty for him. I love CJ Campbell. I just don't know if he gets touches. The main question with that room for me is just how do you kind of go about what Trayshawn Ward brought to it, the determination to production, all those things that made Trayshawn a great player at FSU. How do those numbers get moved around? I think Rodney Hill's a guy that can take some of those numbers. And Lawrence Toafili, someone I didn't mention, a little bit more of a gadget type. But, he has a role. He plays that role well. I don't know that he dramatically increases what he does for FSU from an offensive standpoint. But if he holds steady, holds serve, basically, he's still a very serviceable player and a helpful player for them offensively.
Mike Norvell loves his gadgety weapons. I have an 8 just because I need to see a few things with Rodney Hill as much as I'm very excited about him. If you had Trayshawn Ward back again, like this would probably be a 9 or close to a 10 because I don't know how many teams nationally would have what you have, but it's still we're pretty close there. Wide receiver / tight end, so pass catcher room.
9. There's only one ball to go around. That might be the most difficult thing for those guys. But you got Johnny Wilson, who's an established 1. Keon Coleman, who's a guy who would be a 1 for a lot of schools, who will help alleviate some of that pressure. Jaheim Bell working the middle of the field as a tight end. Biscuit's a cat that I feel comfortable with him playing his role at a high level. He's a kid that kind of took a big step last year for them, and I think continues that progression in a positive manner. Kyle Morlock, I think, will come about later in the year. I'm just not sure he does it out of the gate this year necessarily. But the receiver room has a lot of guys after those first 2 we mentioned who you feel good about. Darian Williamson, for example, is a kid that we've kind of always thought could emerge. Kentron is a guy who had a very good spring, who sounds like he's had a good summer. Chakai Douglas, another gadget guy who has a role to play. Destin Hill, who, I'm not going to discount that he can't do things. I'm sure I'm forgetting a couple that I should have probably mentioned as well.
I'm at an 8, so not too far from you, and you could convince me to go up to 9. I just Pokey is someone who I think Coach AB is the president of the fan club that might be missed more than you think, but I think the talent level that you have in the room is better than a year ago. Offensive line, Chris, this will be a fun one.
I'm an 8.
Think about where you would have been a few years ago with this.
I'm an 8 on the O-line. It's short yardage push. I need to see it. Once they do that, I feel like you can elevate it. They're in a much better position than they've been. I feel like they are truly 10 deep. We know who the 8 are, basically the 5 returning starters, your 3 transfers that have come in, Julian Armella, Jalen earlier, the next 2 guys up. That gives you a nice round number of 10 guys that you can feel good about. I think they rotate a little bit more there. I just got to see them win those short yardage pushes. That's an area where FSU had some struggles at times last year. And if they can do that, which I think they will, I think part of the reason they went and got the transfers they got were to add bulk, especially a Casey Roddick and a Keandre Jones, for example. And we all know how much I like Jeremiah Byers. I think he's got a very high ceiling on what he's capable of being. They can be a really good bunch. And I think Alex Atkins has created an extremely competitive atmosphere. Maurice Smith's probably the only guaranteed starter in that group at center. But they have a lot of capable guys who they could start and you feel comfortable with. And that's not something we've been able to say around these parts a whole heck of a lot in the last decade.
I'm at a 7, Chris, not too far from you. The big caveat for me is I can't believe I'm coming off as negative right now, and I'm very optimistic about all these positions.
I'm on record. I think FSU's offense is going to be one of the top 3 in the country.
It very well could be. It probably should be, based on who returns what you brought in. But the offensive line, I'd feel a little bit better if I knew you had a second center in the fold that you could trust, even like a slightly below average one if he was fine at snapping. I know it's a joke snapping to you, but
that's why you cross-trained Casey Roddick, and it was mixed results with the snapping there, but I think you feel okay with him. Darius Washington's another guy that you can slide in there, and you're the president of that fan club, so I get it. They don't have like the clear-cut guy who can push Maurice in the sense of like truly contend to take his job. Also, Maurice is a boxer who never loses his job.
Yeah, I'm fine with
12 rounds.
Listen, I have confidence in Maurice Smith as your starting center. Like I don't want that to be like I'm fine with him not. I'm totally comfortable with him entering the year as the starter. My concern is if he were to get hurt. I don't think it's be a performance issue with him. Yeah, so that would be my concern. We know that Darius Washington can go in and snap the ball. It's just not going to be the timing of the offense will be different. I don't think it'll be a disaster if Darius were to go in and become the guy, but we'll see. Maybe they'll figure out some solutions or guys will improve. Casey Roddick maybe will get more time this preseason camp at center, and results won't be as mixed. We will see, but that is a thing to watch. And also like very nitpicky of us too. Like I'm talking about the second string center. Oh, how far they've come. Let's move to defense, Chris. Defensive end, edge rushers specifically, or edge defenders.
It's weird because Jared Verse is probably ACC Defensive Player of the Year if you had to pick one preseason. But that 4 spot's still a little bit of a. Is it going to be Byron Turner? Is he ready for that? Is Gilbert Edmond even a guy that you feel super comfortable as your third? I guess I settle in around the 7. I love Verse and Peyton. I feel very confident about what they can bring to the table, but I don't want those guys playing the snaps that we saw like J-Rob and such playing a few years ago. So it's important that Gilbert Edmond, Byron Turner, and then after those two, it would be like Dante Anderson, maybe Jaden Jones, that you get a good solid 2 combo behind those first team guys.
I think it's the biggest discrepancy we have so far. I'm at an 8.5, and it is because largely Jared Verse. I have so much confidence in him and what he is, and then a lot of confidence in Patrick Payton being like that number 2. Like, how many teams nationally would be thrilled with that? Like 90% or like 10% of teams would be able to wait. Most teams would.
15% is the percentage you have left if you're at 8.5 for the match guys. No, I get it. I don't disagree with you. Like if you're doing the ones only, it's like a 9 or 10. My concern is that's a position where you get helmets on knees, as we saw with Jared Verse last year, for example, and just a lot of guys get banged up, and you don't want those dudes playing 75% of game reps. So you don't want them playing 60, 70 reps in a game potentially. And I don't think that's where FSU is. I just feel like there's a healthy drop-off currently from that first group to that second group.
Speaking of 9 or 10, let's talk about the defensive tackle group.
It's a 9 for me. You might go down to an 8 if you don't have Jackson available, and that's to be determined with him dealing with a waiver situation. But I think it's an extremely good group. I'm very high on Braden Fisk and what I think he's capable of. I think it will translate, even though he's going from Western Michigan to Florida State. Fabian Lovett, who I expect to be fine and healthy despite being seen in a boot in Tatum Bethune rock-breaking video, is a guy who's extremely important at FSU. Was 7-0 last year when he played a healthy amount of snaps. It's a really good group. Odell Hagan, as he liked to say yesterday in our very brief interview, is blessed. He's got a nice, deep, talented room. He mentioned Daniel Lyons as a kid that they're high on, and he's someone we've heard decent chatter consistently over the last year about. You got Malcolm Ray, who's kind of a dependable guy. Dennis Briggs, a dependable guy. You got several of those types. So that's a room where you have a nice, healthy rotation, and you got some really dominant players on the front end.
I am at a 9 as well, Chris. And yeah, it'll fluctuate based on what happens with Daryl Jackson. I would say it's not a great sign that we're in early August and FSU hasn't said there's definitive word. I know from people that I've checked with around the program, like the messaging has changed a little bit with how they say things and respond to me about it. So it's like they're still waiting, or it's a little different. So we will see. The messaging had been optimism for a very long period of time, and now I'm not hearing optimism. Now it's either kind of like we don't know what's happening, or we're still waiting, and a sense of like kind of tapping your fingers, figuring out what's going to happen there. So not ideal, I think would be how I would describe it. Fair enough. Let's move on to linebacker. Chris, what do you got for the Randy Shannon bunch?
7.5 is where I settle in. I'm very confident in the first two. They're going to do very well within the system. Kalen DeLoach and Tatum Bethune are both very talented dudes. DeLoach has taken massive steps forward, and it's a credit to him. He's become a really good football player for them. Tatum is super dependable and a tough dude. He played through a lot of stuff last year. The group after that, I'm wait and see mode with Omar Graham. Decent amount of chatter and buzz. Randy Shannon was pretty direct. Mike Norvell has talked about it some. About they've invested a lot in Omar and they feel good about it. And I like Omar a lot. Omar's a kid that we liked a lot in the recruiting process, both as a player and a person. And then DJ Lundy's dependable. I like that group, but if you're only really comfortable with the first three, it's just a little short on numbers. Because again, I always worry about guys in the front 7 on a defense getting banged up, just because it's the name of the game is go and crash into a non-human at full speed. And sometimes that takes a toll on people.
I was close. I was at 6.5. I think the caveat is there's a few more what ifs there than I would like if they play the same way, the two stars play the same way they did against LSU, then you're going to probably be like the 80th or 90th percentile nationally. Like they were great in the opener, but yeah, how do you withstand wear and tear throughout the course of the season if you're DeLoach and Tatum Bethune? And if that's better and you have some better luck than you did with injuries last year, then yeah, that you'll probably be a little bit better. The what if with Omar Graham exists, and if there is any sort of long-term injury, like who jumps up into that too deep then with some of the young guys too. So there are some things with a position group that doesn't have a whole lot of like bodies on the field at any given time that like you could eat into the depth pretty quickly. That does give me some concern. I think that's why I'm a little bit lower on it than you, but like still, I think it's a well above average Power 5 group, and bordering on being a strength for your defense. That's really like that avenue does exist if all the what ifs turn into positives. Finally, let's go to the secondary defensive backfield, Chris.
Where are you at? Let's hear yours first on this one.
I am at a solid, respectable 7.
Yeah, I feel comfortable with that too. I feel like they're
it would maybe
around
be
that
more
top quarter of the country, but at the bottom of that top quarter of the country. So like 7.5. The thing for me is, can Shyheim Brown be the guy they need him to be? I'm not trying to say he's going to be Jamie Robinson. I don't think any singular individual replaces Jamie Robinson this year.
Yeah,
But can
Adam
Shyheim
make sure to
Brown?
tell you that when you tried to
He
ask
did.
him,
He
put you
did.
in your freaking place.
Well, that's Adam. That's how he
Yes,
operates.
man,
I'm
that's
good
how
with
we
it.
like Adam.
Mr. Direct. I prefer. That's in Massachusetts.
I was gonna say it's a very northeastern
Um,
element of him that you and I are comfortable with, I think.
But like Shyheim's got to be more of a dude than he was last year, and that's the expectation. Is that's a progression of a guy within the system. But the thing is that, again, you're looking at what's next after him, and it's a lot of really young guys. I know they love KJ Kirkland. He showed us some really good stuff in the spring before he got banged up. Conrad Hussey's a kid I'm very, very high on. Edwin Joseph has plenty of talent, is in that mix. Ashland Barker, who we referenced earlier in this podcast, big physical, 1 year of JUCO experience kind of kid. He brings something to that room too. I know they like it. But Akeem Dent's also got to play better. Like that, the safeties for me is just one of those positions where like, and Kevin Knowles is now in that mix too, and that's because he's a Swiss Army knife up to $190, and they feel comfortable and confident in the person and the player he is. Another kid who played through a lot of stuff last year physically.
And if you subscribe to Knowles 24/7, you would have known about that like a month ago.
So like you got a lot of bodies back there and a lot of guys, and you got a few who you probably feel pretty good about, especially the Shyheim Browns, Akeem Dent, Kevin Knowles, kind of leading the charge there. Thing for me is just seeing how the pieces fit, how it works. That's the last line of your defense. I feel really good about the island, with Fentrell Cypress and Renardo Green. And then I think J-Dub and Greedy Vance will probably be your nickel types. And I feel really, really good about those spots. And AZ Thomas is a guy who's going to factor into that as well as some others. I feel very comfortable with that group. It's the safeties for me where I have to hesitate.
Yeah, and just the reason why I had it as DBs was just like for the sake of time when I was putting the list together. We started to run out of time and like kickoff was coming. I think it'd be interesting. Like, what if we split it into cornerbacks and safeties? Like, I think it'd be closer to like one would be an 8 and one would be like a 5 or a 6, maybe. I think safeties might be closer to 5 or 6.
Safeties are capable of being very good. I think FSU, the way they use their safeties, they put a lot on the table for them. I don't think they strain them in the sense where, like for example, Pack being your third safety, like he was a guy you were comfortable with when he was out there at being able to be serviceable. I think FSU does a good job kind of playing that position to the guy they're using. There's just so many new faces that you're going to have to find somebody else to use in some of those roles. It's part of the reason Kevin Knowles got moved there, because however it works out with Akeem Dent, Shyheim Brown, and Kevin Knowles, that's your 1, 2, 3 as far as your safeties. I think you're comfortable with all three of them. But there's got to be an elevation of game.
You're one injury away from a true freshman having to be in the 2 deep. And that may not end up being the worst thing in the world based on what you share. Like that there is upside with all three of those newcomers, but you don't want to be forced into that, right?
Yeah, and I don't think you want to see that against LSU or Clemson in the first month of the season, first month of those kids' college career.
But heck, like there is like who was the FAU transfer that ended up going to Ole Miss? I'm blanking on the name right now, but like he probably wasn't going to be available. I know you're not in the transfer market game like I am, but I should be the one knowing the name. But like he probably wasn't going to be available the first month of the season. And so like you move on him because like you need your guys to be ready for like that first month. Like that's where if you're taking a veteran, ultimately I think Kevin Knowles moving to safety might be a beneficial move for everyone. That might end up working out well. But
I will say I talked to Pat yesterday when we did the coach interview. Mm-hmm. They love the versatility they got in the back half, and their goal is definitely to be a group that consumes a lot more interceptions than they had last year. I think he said 6. I can't remember if it was actually 6 or 8, but obviously did not have a great deal of interception. I think the team had 8 interceptions. I'm wondering if the secondary only had 6 of them. I can't recall offhand. He said 6 yesterday.
Go through all these position groups and like none are below 5, and like we're both optimistic on where the team's going to be. But like
I think the offense has capability of being damn near elite.
Yeah.
I think the defense is going to be a top quarter defense in
Very
the country
good.
and in Power 5. And I think you can live with that. I think the key for the defense is being more opportunistic than maybe they were last year.
Yeah.
That means
how do you play with
downs, get off the field, take away the ball. Those kind of things are vitally important.
Prolific offense, and that's how do you play within each other? I'm totally with you. I think
special teams.
I did not do it, but I just wrote it down right before you asked that because I think we will. Because I started planning ahead in like a month when we do this again as a check back, and if the score goes up or down, the fan base is going to lose their mind. So, all right, I'm workshopping this out loud. Long snapper James Rosenberry, a 10, obviously, right?
Because he did the video, yeah,
exactly. But also, he is considered one of the better long snappers in the country. Alex Mastermano, I think we feel decent with. We know what he is. I think he's an asset for you. I think I would trend more towards that. So probably like a 6 or a 7 out of 10.
Yeah.
And then we get to kicker. And I can't tell you that I feel great about that. I don't want to lie to people. I know people in the program feel good about it, but
kicker for me is still like a 4. Like, hopefully they don't have to use it all a lot. Hopefully the offense is good enough that we're only worrying about extra points. I am happy they brought in Tyler Keltner. If for nothing else, it's a safety net. Also helps to push Ryan. I don't think Ryan really needed to be pushed necessarily, but I think it's beneficial for him to have another guy who he knows can come into that role if need be. And to Ryan's credit, he battled through what was not enjoyable for the young man last year. But at the end of the day, I just, when FSU rolls out there, kick a field goal, I'm never feeling super optimistic about it until it just becomes an afterthought.
I think that's fair. I would go with a 5 collectively for the group right now is where I'm going to set it at going into camp.
I'm also, and there's so much more to special teams. Punt returns, one of those things that life after Micah Pittman. So got to figure that out. I'm
going to a 4. Or number, Chris?
I'll go with a 5 overall. I think they're solidly middle. I think they've got options for punt return and kick return. I think they feel pretty good about that. It's just Micah Pittman was so good at making sure he caught the ball, secured the ball, and then ended up working somewhat forward.
All right. Well, this has been instructive. It's been informative. It's been a twisting, turning podcast with a ton of topics covered. Thank you for everyone for listening. Thank you for the subscribers of our website, of the podcast. Thanks for people who give us good reviews on iTunes. The ones who don't, dead to me, especially like the person who said they're deducting a point that it would be a 5-star podcast, but it's a 4 because Sonnone hosted it. And then you gave us a 3. Learn how to do math, dummy.
Maybe they thought it was a 4 and they took away the point for you, buddy.
No, they said it would be a 5.
Yeah, I'm sure
else must have happened.
I'm sure that ranking's going to elevate after you calling them out individually. So good job there.
I didn't say their name. All right, for Christy, I'm Brendan Sonnone. Zach Blossing's been moving. We'll get him back on the bench fairly soon. Not literal bench, more the metaphoric bench here. Check out Knowles 24/7 for all of our camp coverage. We're a little shorthanded going into it, but we'll be hitting our stride when it really matters. All right, for Chris, I'm Brendan. This has been On the Bench. See you guys later. I don't know why I did this. This is what I want to do. Peace. COVID brain. Bye.